Cindi Barker is a community activist and organizer. She first became interested in emergency response as a member of King County Search and Rescue in the mid-90s. In West Seattle, she has worked on community preparedness after the Nisqually earthquake in 2001 and was a founding member of West Seattle Be Prepared, which established 7 emergency communication hubs locations in West Seattle. In 2008, she banded with other like-minded community organizers to support each other in preparedness efforts across Seattle. And there are now over 140 hubs in multiple neighborhoods. She is retired from the Boeing company after 34 years and now gets to volunteer full-time instead. Congratulations. And yes, sometimes travel. So welcome, Cindi. We're very excited to hear your presentation today.
Great, thank you. I will go ahead and share my screen. So what I'm going to talk about today is getting prepared for disasters. You've heard a lot from the speakers already today about what it's like to be a ham radio operator in disaster situations and how to help and how to be prepared to do that. Well, I want to talk to you about what the other side of the equation is what is the community doing if you are in radio MCOMs? And so one of the models I'm going to share with you today is called the Seattle Emergency Communication Hubs. What we're going to cover today is the what and the why, the little bit of the background about the how the hubs came to be, how the hubs work, what the network and activities of the hubs are, and how we do outreach and engagement with the rest of the community as part of a preparedness group. And so just for simple definitions, what a hub is it is just a gathering place that would stand up in the event of a major disaster. And when we talk major disaster here in Seattle, we really envision all normal communications are out. You cannot share information over the radio, over the TV, with internet, because there's no power. It's all those things that really create, extremely stressful conditions in a disaster, regardless of what the physical damage is. And a hub is a place to meet and gather and exchange your information, who has something, who needs something, who can help someone with each other, and then also to get that situational awareness up to the city as fast as possible, and to have a methodology for the city to transfer out its important public safety messaging to as far out into the neighborhoods as they can get. What we are not is we are not a government agency. We are all volunteers. We work in partnership with the Seattle Office of Emergency Management. We follow what they do. We read their planning. We participate in as many events and discussions as we can get. But we are 100% just citizens and volunteers within the community. A hub is also not a shelter site. We set up our hubs in open fields, in parks, in parking lots, by the sides of buildings, because if we have the expected Cascadia subduction zone or Seattle fault earthquake, you will not be able to get into buildings. You're just going to want to have a safe place to be able to start your response. So there is no sheltering that's going to happen at those locations. We're also not a station where you can come and get a firefighter to come help or a medic necessarily to help you. We are not triage hospitals. And we are also not going to be food depots. We do not cache food and water. And I'll show you what we do have at our hub sites. But we are places where people can connect to find how to go to get that stuff or where to get it. And to illustrate a little bit of the history of preparedness in Seattle, we had a Nisqually earthquake, as has been mentioned before, in 2001. And for those of us out in the communities, we all kind of went, wow, we dodged a bullet, because there was a lot of damage downtown, but mostly out in the neighborhoods and many of the high-rise buildings, there was not a lot of damage. But in our community meetings, we were talking to police and fire going, yeah, what are you guys going to do when this happens next time for real and it's bad? And they're like, you don't understand. There is not enough of us to answer that question for you. We will be doing high priority work, and we definitely have our assignments and our plans, and we will be executing those. But there are currently now 770,000 people in Seattle. And for example, there's like about 210 firefighters on any given shift. And so it's just the order of magnitude kind of woke us up and said, yeah, you're right. And they really were pointed in saying, you community leaders are going to be who get your neighborhoods through while we spool up the response and work through the priorities. And so if people are just minorly inconvenienced, they're not going to be talking to any official responder for quite a while. So in Seattle, they have always had programs, and I'm going to start at the base of the pyramid. They talk a lot about personal preparedness, that you and your family should be prepared. And the FEMA guidance now is 2 weeks. Be prepared to be on your own for 2 weeks, have your family plan, know how you're going to communicate with each other should there be a disaster, so that you all are safe. And Seattle has what's called SNAP. It's Seattle's Neighborhoods Actively Prepare. It's a program that they have been using since about 2003, which builds on the block level preparedness. So if you and your family are connected with all your neighbors, and you and your neighbors have practiced thinking about what would you do in a disaster, you can be your own little response unit, and you can take care of. Not everybody may know how to shut off their utility valves if they're needed. You might have seniors in your neighborhood who just need some additional help. You might have pets that have gone crazy. You may have elected to store water in somebody's garage, and that's the cache for the neighborhood to use. So it's a block level preparedness, and that exists in many forms in many jurisdictions for those of you who are outside the city. And then at the time of Nisqually, there was no hubs. It just went, you and your neighbors were organized, and it went straight to city services. So when the hubs started, it was in a response to Nisqually. It was hearing that we needed to be cognizant of what we're going to have to do in our communities. And so the hubs was really designed around that community level. So most of us live in neighborhoods. Seattle is really known as a city of neighborhoods. There's like at least 39 distinct neighborhoods here. And my neighborhood, for example, is about 5,000 people. So our hub would be that gathering place for, a lot of people who may come from organized blocks, come to the hub, get what they need, and go back to their neighbors and share it. And that all helps support the city services at the top, which are the rare and scarce, but professional services. And we're going to depend on to really help facilitate starting response and starting recovery. Outside of Seattle, I just did want to recognize that there are very similar models out there. All over America, there are the Citizen Emergency Response Teams, the CERT teams. There are, in Seattle, I know of several Be Prepared coalitions. We have Vashon Be Prepared and Bainbridge Prepares, and they kind of do a combination of what the hubs do and what the CERT teams do. CERT teams are really focused on the search and rescue and the highly skilled, they go through a certification process, highly skilled response activities. And in the more preparedness or hub model, it's more like just help people who just don't know what to do or are trying to get information. So that combination of a coalition is really effective. Map Your Neighborhood is a Washington state program that was similar to the SNAP program. It's block level preparedness. They deal with everywhere in the state, people who are trying to organize small rural neighborhoods, for example, or block level. And it is transitioning. That's the last bullet on there. It's called 2 weeks ready, be 2 weeks ready. So it's the same thing. They're just kind of rebranding the information. So a few more words about the hubs, and I'll pause for some questions. So when I talk about the places that we're going to gather, we do not have a lot of stuff stashed there. We had originally started with backpacks, and when we realized, well, if the hub captain's not home and a disaster happens and the backpack is in their basement, that's probably not a great idea. So we went to a model where we get these job boxes, which are about 4 by 5 feet or 3 by 5 smaller boxes. And they sit kind of inconspicuously in our parks or the parking lots because they look like parks equipment. It looks like it's got gardening stuff in there generally. And you can see from the picture, all that's in it is tables, chairs, a pop-up tent, whiteboards, and the writing equipment. So it is really around the communications and the connections for people. And that is our main commodity of information. All these pictures I'm showing you are going to be from our exercises that we do. We've done a yearly exercise for 10 years. And it's passing the information from the city down, which is where ham radio comes in, collecting it from the neighborhood, who knows what's broken, who knows what's open, who knows where a shelter has been set up. And so it's practicing and managing that. And you can see that it takes various forms when you do that. And that's because there is no one size fits all hub. every hub is different. We all live in different neighborhoods. Some are single family, some are really heavily multifamily. Some have high language variability. We've got one neighborhood where 39 languages are spoken. Your topography is different. Your volunteers are different. And the volunteers at each hub are the ones who kind of have to know what their neighborhood's like, kind of can predict based on what we work with the Seattle to learn about, as TJ pointed out, what are our hazards, what are our risks, what are our vulnerabilities, how do we figure out how our hub is going to run. And even if we're not all using the same procedures and forms, the general idea of matching people and getting them information is something you practice and you build in muscle memory, and you may not execute it exactly the same, but you're trying to bring order to chaos much earlier in the process. And then the other thing we do is outreach. And so when we outreach around what is a hub and where is your hub, we do a lot more outreach around you should be personally prepared, and here's why. And the differences in the populations are, can we communicate in language? Do we have access and functional needs to consider? And do we have population differences? And we find when we do outreach in Seattle, we have new Americans who have moved here and they didn't even have earthquakes in their country. So we have to start at a level where we're really educating people on some of the basics. Relative to you guys, some hubs will have ham radio operators, but many will not. And that's because ham radio operators are really a valued resource in the city of Seattle. And when we do exercises and we talk to people and people get interested in the hubs, we often have people who go, I'm going to go work with the auxiliary communication service team. And so we've grown people who know about hubs and the city and can work in both of those. But you are the major pipeline as a radio between what the city is trying to get out to the citizens and how will it get out to 780,000 citizens. Maybe they don't have crank radios. What are we going to do? And so it's really critical to get the information about safety issues, damage extent, where shelters are opening up, and the survival things that people need to know after a disaster. Sometimes we'll have volunteers who say, they don't need me down at the auxiliary communication, at the EOC, I've got about 4 hours. What can I do for you? So they may be at a hub and they may not. Mostly we think that that's when ham radio operators are going to come out of the woodwork who said, I wasn't interested in MCOM. I like Parks on the Air. I liked, doing contesting, but I have these skills. What can you use me for? And so we have to figure out how to integrate those people. And Scott made some points about that earlier. It's better if you have one model on what you're doing, but you have to be prepared to integrate anybody who comes in. And then if we don't have a radio operator, and I will say we do use GRMS, but I am not going to go that bunny trail. You can take me down that in your questions. We talk hub to hub with Simplex or GRMS, but if we don't have anybody there, we're going to use SneakerNet to get to the local field station and bring back information. We have practiced just turning a ham radio on and putting it to the frequency so people can listen, but we won't be able to provide situation awareness back up to the city if we don't have ham radio operators. And so before I pause to do, more specifics about the hubs, I want to put in my PSA here. So you are a most valuable resource for us, for all citizens. And so if you are personally prepared, it's going to make a big difference. So I really encourage everybody to come out of this thinking about your MCOM potential role. Make sure you're ready to be self-reliant for 2 weeks. And FEMA has always talked about have a go kit, have a bag. A lot of you do your own gear bags because of MCOM, but we really emphasize the water, the food, the life essential medications. Everything else is bonus. If you have to wear the same shirt for a week, you had to wear a shirt for the same week. For those of us who are responders, it's more important for flashlights and some other, lots of batteries, a generator, but just make sure you can do the minimum and you and your family are going to be okay so that you can communicate, how to get back together. So if you're going to be a volunteer, you don't have to worry about them. And then the last bullet is, there isn't a session here in Com Academy this year about, the greatest go kits in the world, but make sure that's up and ready to go. It's really critical that it's on standby at any given time. So I'm going to pause there. Is there any questions, Tim?
Yeah, this is Catherine. There was a question that you sort of touched on a little bit about CERT. How do the hubs integrate with or not with CERT teams?
Yeah, Seattle has never had CERT teams. That is a decision the Office of Emergency Management made. They have taught CERT classes a couple of years, but they have never committed to sponsoring or managing a CERT team. So what I showed you on the pyramid is all we have in Seattle, which is SNAP neighborhood groups. And the city actually doesn't even register them. They just give people the training and say, go out and be ready. And then the hubs and then city personnel. So no CERT within Seattle.
Okay, and there's one other question about the role of hubs' relationship with fire stations. How do the fire stations factor into community response?
We have been working with the fire station. I mean, and the Auxiliary Communications Service has been too. They have had windshield survey plans, you know, the situation awareness collecting. We've put the hubs on their maps so that, you know, if they're driving around and they have time to also include a stop at a hub, but usually within the first 30 minutes, there's no hubs up and running yet. And so windshield surveys are going to happen. Then they're going to prioritize what they need to be working on, whether it's fires or medical. They know of the hubs, and we're going to try and make sure information can flow to our fire stations. Most of us have met our battalion chiefs and had discussion with them, but it's kind of hard because we have a lot of rotation of personnel. And so, you know, we just sort of know each other, but we have not actually done an actual exercise together yet.
Great, thank you. And there's just one small one, kind of a fun one for our viewers who are not able to access the chat. Could you just clarify what a sneaker net is, please?
Well, a sneaker net is when you put a kid in tennis shoes and say, go 2 miles down the road and talk to these people. So it's tennis shoes, sneakers. So it's the, not radio net, sneaker net. Sorry. Okay, anything else?
Not at the moment. If you want to carry on, I'll capture them as they pop up.
Yeah, I'll have another break. I'll stop. So I'm going to talk a little bit about now the actual hubs and how we run. So when we activate, we were really designed for the major disasters. It is for when all communications has failed, which is typically going to be an earthquake or maybe a winter storm. And we had Nisqually in 2001, and then in Seattle we had a windstorm in 2005. And here, where I live in West Seattle, it took out power for 2 weeks, and that was really what we saw. The hubs formed after that because we saw people were gathering at grocery stores trying to figure out, you know, buy the batteries that weren't on the shelves anymore. They were trying to exchange information about what restaurants might have opened in the rest of West Seattle. Everybody was trying to get the information they needed, because you couldn't get it anywhere else. You couldn't get on the West Seattle blog and find out what was going on. So that model of that social, people are going to want to come together, get that information, but really you don't want to stand up in a snowstorm when everybody can sit at home and get all the information they need over the internet. So we have not activated ever because we have not had another major disaster at that level. We also have to make sure it's going to be safe for volunteers to head out. So if there is a windstorm that takes out power, we're going to wait for the windstorm to go on, and that we're not going to be, you know, at risk of falling power lines or trees if we're out in our parks. And we also have to make sure our volunteers have made sure that their family is safe and that they're going to be okay to activate. This is a map. This is a printed version of the online interactive map we've got. Every one of these little icons will tell you there's 143 places where you can gather, and some of those have active teams. Not all of them do. Many of our P-patch locations do not have active teams, but you can go to the interactive map and click on the icon, and you can find out who your hub captain is and how to contact them, and the exact location, like if it's in a large park, you know, southeast corner of Lincoln Park or whatever. So you can look that up, and we manage that information. And so now I'm going to take through some of the pictures of what it really looks like. So when we do our exercises, we typically do we pick one day, and across the city, 12 to 15 of the hubs will say, I'm ready. We haven't exercised in a year or two. We're going to activate our hub. So you'll see all sorts of different pictures, and that's because many of the hubs take take practice in this in different roles. A hub has kind of got two branches to it. One is a little more passive. It is an information branch. And that I mean passive in that you don't have to talk to every single person. They can come up and get what information they need and leave. But there's three chunks to that, and we'll go through these in detail. An education area where people can just learn some information they might need. The active information area, which is what is going on within the disaster, what is open and closed, what bridges are up and down, where are the community points of distribution being set up. And then we also put up an area where people can just post information to themselves. My collie has run away. I'm looking for the lost dog. There's no reason to involve volunteers in, kind of recording that stuff. Let people talk to themselves and help each other too. The hubs do spend more time over on the action side of it, which is where we're also doing who needs, who has, who can supply, who can volunteer, and the skills are just as important as, any resource. And then we'll talk a little bit about how does medical response look in this. So we're going to walk through each of these areas. And here I've put the people, oops, I moved the cursor away. There's the people that are within the hub and the roles that relate to them. And over on the side is a picture of kind of the book set that we have in each hub box, which is, it's not very deep. It's one page of, these are the 5 important things you do at this job. Here are the aids we've got for you, whether it's another tip book or a set of forms or questions to help people think about. And the other part that is part of that is just hub worker safety. And we, have, like always in a radio activation, you have safety officer. We have a safety officer role, but you also have mental safety. We are in the middle of a disaster. We have stressed people. We're stressed. You just have to make sure everybody has got psychological first aid in mind as you work through this. So those books help people remember why you're here, what you need to do, and what are the important things. So we'll start going through some of these roles. So the greeter and messenger role. The greeter is kind of like our triage person. So if you've got 50 people lined up because you're trying to control the entry in so that they can efficiently go to where they want to go, you're just trying to shoot them off to the right place. You're here for information, go that direction. You need something, go that direction. And then along the way, we have message takers who can, if a form is needed, for example, somebody needs a chainsaw. That's my favorite example. Somebody needs a chainsaw. They would go over to the board for resources of things and see if anybody's offered a chainsaw. If there is, they would work out where am I supposed to go to access the chainsaw? And if not, they're going to have to fill out a form that says, I need a chainsaw. Here's how to get a hold of me when we find a chainsaw. So those forms are kind of important. And as you guys as radio operators know, if you can't read your handwriting, you can't do anything. So make sure if people are writing stuff down, you do a quality check before they leave. So I just always have to put that out because I can never read my partner's writing after we do radio exercises. The other area we have, so these are the now active areas. We have the greeter, we have an educator, and they manage a tent that looks like this. And it really is just information. And I'm going to go ahead and go on to, we created 5 different posters because we realized that, maybe people are going to be drinking out of their hot water tank. The water's gone and they didn't store any water. And we can at least say, do you know you have 40 gallons in your hot water tank? And they may not know how to get it out. So they can come take a picture of how you can typically get water out of your tank. Or if the city has sent out a boil water notice or purify water notice, and you go, I have no power to boil my water, you can at least tell them what's the proportion of bleach to water. So it's that at the moment, helpful hints that maybe people are not thinking of properly when it's critical. Food is, food and sanitation, those things that can start to trigger health problems if we don't manage what's going on. Those are the sort of things we addressed. Okay. This is pictures of what it looks like where we have information areas. We have whiteboards, we have hanging sheets of laminated white paper, we have, Post-it things, and it's just trying to keep track. And as information comes through the radio system or through the neighborhood system, what are we hearing? What are people telling? Keeping it updated, making sure it's right, making sure you're putting up information that comes from trusted people. I mean, you know, this is the problem of somebody comes up and says, well, I heard that this happened. And you're like, where did you hear it? How do we know? Can we confirm that before we put it up so that we're not spreading bad information? And that you can also, besides what's written, you can use maps to help illustrate. There are going to be a lot of people who are going, my kid is on Mercer Island, and can I get to Mercer Island? And you can help them with the maps of, here's what the damage looks like. And you saw some of the damage from Puerto Rico in the hurricanes. We do not know what the damage is going to look like here in Seattle with the trees and stuff, but we know the bridges are going to be at high risk for damage. And the planning work done by Cascadia Rising exercises is like not looking good. You know, the bridges are going to be closed for at least a couple of weeks, and they won't all be able to be repaired right away. So being able to tell people what the right route, you know, what the most effective, or you won't have to turn around route is to get to hospitals, that's really going to be important. So that's a key area for us. So that was kind of the information side. I didn't show you the, you know, people where people could self-post, but over on the activity side where we're doing matching, you know, these are kind of the topics we think people are going to be most interested in. Food and water, obviously, resources, the things, you know, I need tarps for my roof, whatever it is. Shelter, we do not know what to expect. We know that people don't like to leave their house. They don't like to go into shelters. But if you're in earthquake country and you're having aftershocks, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be afraid to go back in their houses. And we have high rises that have been built to, you know, new earthquake standards, that may not deter people from going, I'm just afraid to go back in my 22-story building. And we do have a lot of unreinforced masonry buildings in Seattle, which are at high risk. And then just the being ready to answer the questions of what's going on with medical. Are we just having to send everybody to the local hospital? Has the fire station opened the back of the Medic One and they're doing a triage tent? You know, we in West Seattle, we don't even have direct access to a hospital. We have to go over bridges. So we're like, okay, 20 miles to Highline Hospital. How are we going to be able to get there? So we may be looking for doctors and nurses to be able to be at a hub and stabilize so that we can transport. At the needs and resources tent, I mean, it takes all sorts of forms. Some hubs organized by file folders. Some have made this little pocket holder thing. Oops. Some just use the wall that they're attached to and tape it up. But it's all around trying to have a reasonably quick and efficient way to do the matching of needs and resources. In our volunteer area, we know people will want to help. And even if they've come and they're looking for that chainsaw and nobody's got a chainsaw and they're going to have to put it up and wait, you ask them, do they have a skill that they can offer? Because we're going to have to staff this hub, not just for one shift, but for multiple shifts. And we probably won't operate at night, and the city will probably issue out a curfew, but you cannot do, unlike radio, you know, typically radio teams work in 12-hour shifts. You could not run a volunteer in a public facing operation like this for 12 shifts. We're like thinking 4 is going to wipe you out. So we need lots of volunteers to come in, pick up that handy book and integrate right in with some on-the-job training. But for actual response, we're going to need people with trade skills. We need people with translators. Think of Boy Scouts as kind of being the epitome. Anybody who has camped and has preparedness skills and knows how to put up a tarp that doesn't collect water, you know, those are important things. Organizational skills, you can see how this is really dependent on being able to keep the data coordinated and organized and up to date. So people who can do that kind of innately. And we need preachers, we need counselors, we need school teachers who can show up and know how to calm people. Just keeping the people from going into stress is going to be really important. And using the scouts to, for example, go out and gather information. Get this. We do think the city will ask hubs for situation awareness. You know, whether it's what are conditions in your area in general terms, or are they getting worse, or can you go check? We do not have eyes on this major Seattle Housing Authority building. Can you go look at that and tell us if that survived? So gathering information and providing that up. So volunteers is going to be huge. And it's better to have roles ready for volunteers than to have people come up and go, what can I do? And you don't have any way to help put them to effective use. And I talked a little bit already about the medical volunteers. We do not keep lists of medical people in our neighborhoods. And we get asked that a lot. And it's because as soon as you make a list, the next day it's out of date because somebody just moved, somebody new came in that you don't know about, somebody was on vacation the day of the disaster, somebody has been told that their response station is at a hospital. And so it's hugely variable. So we really work to get the word out to the medical community. If you are not busy, come to a hub. And, we may have gotten a call from the Medical Reserve Corps saying, we need all hands on deck, collect all your people who have any kind of a medical license and hold on to them while we get instructions to them. So we also may just have to use someone who says, I'm a retired nurse, but I can stabilize your legs so it won't hurt you as your family drives you to the hospital. So, but we just have to be ready to stand by and use whatever tools we have in whatever way we are needed. The radio role within all of the hub, I've talked about the messaging coming from the city and going up to the city. The safe and well messaging is going to be a really, really important role. And we are still working on that. We spend years figuring out how certain procedures work. And we finally got this year to the safe and well messaging. Safe and Well is a website run by the American Red Cross. It is typically set up after a disaster in the disaster area at a shelter where they have power and internet. And so people can come say, I'm okay. They fill out a form and it goes out over the internet into a database so that your Aunt Louise in Kansas City can go on and say, I'm looking for Cindy in Seattle and here's her email, or here's her address. And they get a match so that they can go, okay, she's okay. If we don't have internet and we don't have power, we are going to be back to using ham radio. The radiogram was the old way of doing that. The AARL is looking at digitizing it. So this goes back to the first presentation today for FL Digi. How can we do that effectively? What are the methodologies we're going to do that? How would you do that in Seattle where the first shelter won't be set up for 4 days? That is the goal of Seattle, to have their first shelter set up on day 4. And that does not necessarily guarantee internet. They probably will have power because they'll have brought in a generator, but it does not guarantee internet. And so we've got people for 4 days trying to get messaging out to their families out of town. We always encourage people to have a point of contact so they can, as they come out of the earthquake, and they can get the text out that says, I'm okay, getting with kids before everything goes down. But 4 days of stressed families trying to get their information out is going to be a really big project for us to work this year. And this is what a kind of a sample hub looks like. This is actually a hub layout for Victory Heights up in Northeast Seattle. They have a park. Their hub box is outside the tennis court. And in an activation, they're going to take over the tennis court, which is a very smart idea because you have pavement instead of grass to stand on. But you can see how they've sort of set it up. The gate is where people will funnel through. The information areas are right at the front. So all the, I just need info can take place before you get back into the hub where they're trying to actively manage information and people. And so you've got a place where the volunteers can collect and we can do reunification. And then way over in the corner is the radio area. Because there's a fence around tennis courts, if you put the radio outside, you're going to have to run around every time you want to pass a message. So we're going to practice that one at the end of this month and see if we've gotten enough space between the radio area and where the rest of the hub is operating. So I'm going to pause there for some questions around just what a hub is and how they operate, because the next thing I'll talk about is how we all connect together.
Right, Cindy, I'll grab you a couple of questions here. So it sounds like there is a role for all people at the hub, different skills, etc. Can you talk about what sort of commitment the volunteers are making to be involved ahead of time in a hub? It'll come up a little bit when I talk in the network, but really we just practice, and we have bi-monthly meetings where we just figure out what we're doing and making sure our procedures work. So your commitment to be a really super active volunteer is
every other month, attend a meeting. Every month, we offer a deep dive on a specific topic. So attend those if you're interested. And once a year, go out and exercise. Get to either activate your own hub and do an exercise, or go to somebody else's exercise to make sure you're building your muscle memory and you're thinking about, what you would do in your own hub. And if you don't want to be a hub captain, that's a hub captain level volunteers. It's just go to the exercise and practice and be prepared yourself.
Okay, great. Thank you. One other question we had is, what is a realistic timeline for the hubs actually standing up? Is there information from other jurisdictions with similar programs that have experienced a disaster?
We have not found anybody who had pre-standing hubs. I don't think I mentioned Portland. Portland's got teams. They have kind of a CERT kind of team called Nets, and they have a radio team called Beacons. And everybody seems to agree. It's like, check on yourself, see what you're, make sure you're okay. So we think it's somewhere between 30 minutes to 2 hours before a hub would really get set up. And people are going to trickle in. Hopefully the hub captain has got it so that they're going to be one of the first people to show up. But in West Seattle, we've issued the keys so that, multiple people can open the hub boxes.
For sure. Yes, with the islanding that's anticipated for Seattle, that's super important. We have some other questions, but I think they can wait until the end. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, I've only got about 10 more slides, so I'll go pretty quick. So as I mentioned, we got about 66 of those hubs that are actively kind of thinking about how to do this. They really are figuring out, where are they going to do it? How is it going to be laid out? What are businesses that they can use to, connect into to find out if they're going to be opened or closed or what their business plans are. And all that is connected by the individual groups are connected by a network, which is, it's all us volunteers. And we just do this just like sort of ACS works. You have a couple of people who are in a leadership role. And what we do is that mutual support so that people can think about their area, but not reinvent the wheel every time. So how did somebody do in another neighborhood? I've got a lot of high-rise buildings. What are you doing? So we do training around topics that people say I need help with. We do exercises to practice stuff. We created generic outreach material, which is translated into multiple languages so that you can use it to do preparedness messaging as well as what's a hub and where's your hub. When we get new people coming in, they have new ideas and new improvements. So every, it's like the collaboratives, you always get improvements because people see things differently. We stay connected together with, we have a website that's kind of generic and public facing, a newsletter that goes to about 1,900 people who come to the exercises to help us practice. And then we have an email where all the hub captains can talk directly to each other. And then the other thing that the network does is there are a lot of meetings that go around emergency preparedness. There are a lot of groups out there, and you'll see this in a second. And not everybody has to go to every meeting. So we have a couple of people who like meetings or they like a topic. And so they act as a representative and bring back information for the hubs. And it is just all volunteers. This is kind of that picture of who are those partnerships. And so that top level is really the big, giant national, Red Cross and non-government organizations that do focus on disaster response. In the middle is, things like your city departments or your reserve corps or food banks or ecumenical councils or school systems, they're kind of in all our neighborhoods, but they often operate out of a central organization or facility. And so that's a place where we usually have a hub person represent the hubs and do, get information flow going between the two. Hub captains focus really on that bottom layer because they're also in every neighborhood, but they're much more unique. You have private schools that are there. You may not even have a funeral home, to have the discussion of what do you do with deceased people. But we all have churches, and churches are fantastic ad hoc shelters. Talking with your neighbor actively prepared groups, doing presentations with them to make sure that they're all prepared and ready to go. So that bottom layer is what a hub captain really focuses on. And the network also helps make connections too. Big goal for the hub network is keeping people trained and engaged. there's nothing worse than a government that launches some really cool program and you get a lot of training, and then the guy who was really invested in that gets transferred or moves, and the training falls off, or the budget is cut by the city council. So we really made a commitment to keep people trained and engaged. And because we're all volunteer, it's easy. We don't have to worry about budgets. But we really emphasize doing the field exercises and engaging everybody that you can reach in your community to participate in those. We do on a regular basis and on request workshops on specific topics. We have this thing called Hub 101, which is where you get this kind of presentation of what is a hub and what do these different stations do. And then we go, okay, we set the room up and it's like a hub. And so who wants to be the greeter and who's going to be the information coordinator? And we put people into kind of like a tabletop exercise where they can go, how do you resolve this question that's come to the hub? So it's a real hands-on practice. And those are how we work out kinks. We problem solve with specific topics in tabletop exercises. We were not happy with how we were managing our volunteers. The form seemed clunky and it seemed like we weren't being very efficient. So we did a tabletop where we broke up into 7 groups and figured out 7 different ways to manage it and then picked the one that seemed to work best for everybody. While we've been off on COVID here, we wrote pandemic instructions so that we think that we can safely operate a hub should we have to activate in the middle of a big pandemic. We also do deep dive topics where we talk about sanitation, or we're going to have an electrical grid next month. Very specific topics so that new people to the system, not everybody has been around for all these years. New people can come in and learn the information, and that's how they grow their resilience, is because we just add to their knowledge base. And then we fill gaps that we think are occurring. We do tip sheets, like, for example, on how to do a quick shelter, an ad hoc shelter. So we can give it to a church before they open and go check and make sure that whether you've got ADA or whether if you've got your toilets are still working, you've got enough toilet paper for people. It's things that you might want to think of before you work. And I'm going to touch on this really lightly. Engaging the whole community is really important when you are doing outreach, to tell people why there's even a hub. People go, why is this? Well, we live in earthquake country, but you have to be able to do that and get people to think of it in all the dimensions. What are the cultural dimensions? Can you have a shelter where you can have men and women together? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on what your neighborhood is made up of. How many languages are you going to have to deal with? And what kind of accessibility? Are you going to have people who are stranded in their homes and who may not be part of a neighborhood network? How do you make sure that somebody is encouraged to go look in on those people in all those languages and in all those demographics? And lastly, we know that the resource sharing is really important because we have very large parts of our city that do not have high economic advantage. COVID has made it even worse. Everybody's stressed, and we all now realize what the supply chain does. When it gets stressed, it completely breaks. So just thinking through all those things and engaging everybody on those problems. So my final slide is really, I do this work and I talk to folks like you guys who are already mostly knowledgeable about response, because it is going to be about the community. I think it was Scott who said every disaster is local. It is going to be local to all the people in your communities. You may be helping in the role you've already picked. And if you don't already have a role, find out what's going on in your community. Are there CERT teams? Are there coalitions? Where's your closest hub? What is in your community that you may not actively be prepared to do on a daily basis, but you can take some steps to plug into in the end when you have to do something with your skills and talent to help in a disaster. And then taking those steps to be personally prepared. That's really important too. I did not say at the beginning, but the hubs are all the people. It's, the hubs is kind of a thing, right? It is all these people within Seattle who've taken their time to build the system, who've made the commitment to be ready in a disaster when you'd rather be at home, hunkered down and trying to be safe, to go out and help your neighbors. And so all these people you see, there's hundreds of people who have helped build this over the years. And so I'm really proud to be able to represent them and tell you about what the hubs do. Thank you for your attention today. And I think we got 5 minutes left for Q&A.
Thank you, Cindi.
That was
That was
wonderful,
fantastic.
Cindi. Yeah, great stuff. And I'll toot your horn a little bit for folks who aren't from this area or aren't familiar with the hubs. Cindi has been just a force of nature in all the best possible ways in Seattle in getting the hubs not just off the ground, but really helping keep things moving and developing constantly. And, you know, it's something we know as radio operators, that there's no standing still. I mean, it's just got to be a constant forward motion of improving skills and capabilities and practicing. And, you know, as soon as you've reached thing 10 on your list, it's time to go back to thing 1 and refresh on that, because it's been a while since you worked on it. It's never ending. And I know that process for the hubs is a huge amount of work. It's a big deal. So anyway.
Or better yet, you have a COVID pandemic and you figure out what your role in that is too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Just throw that on top of the heap along with everything else. Yeah. So let's see if we have any remaining questions.
We have a few, yes.
Yeah. There are a couple. Let's see. Here's a non-technical one, and this is something that's been touched on a couple of times in different ways. But the equity issue with preparedness, thoughts about how we can address that, and how is the city helping? I'm thinking that's probably its own whole presentation. But any quick thoughts on that?
So when we developed the hubs, it was really, we weren't building a network. We really just said, oh, I'm doing this in West Seattle. You want to learn about it? Sure, I'll come out and tell you. So it was organically growing. And so that means it grows in places where you have retired people who have time to do this sort of stuff. There are exceptions, but generally it was kind of like a very homogeneous population doing this. And so the city is very highly aware of that. And we have learned that is important too. So even in each of our communities, we have different populations. And I've done presentations in Min and Chinese and Vietnamese, and that is a big equity thing. And that is why I covered that whole community. FEMA is not kidding. Your whole community is really different. And language is one thing, cultural is another thing. And access and functional needs is a whole nother dimension.
Thank you. We had a question about what is the best hook to engage the community in emergency preparedness and working with hubs? Like, what is, some people say data, some people may think it was more of an emotional thing, but what is really effective in getting people to really wake up and get involved?
I'm sorry to say, but it's really tailored to who you're talking to. We will, so if you go to a community meeting, like, for example, I'm doing a community meeting and I'm talking about the earthquake damage that's come out on some maps that we can see is going to really damage some senior buildings. And so you talk to people about what's our community response? Let's think about those vulnerable people. If I'm doing an outreach table, it is just people management. If you're doing an outreach table and somebody walks up to you with a dog, that is probably your hook for that person, is to say, do you have a preparedness kit for your dog? So, the FEMA community goes back and forth. Do you scare the crap out of people, or do you, tell them how important this is? We are all fighting people's divided attention, their limited resources. There are so many other fun things to do. There is just not a good right answer, but it's the sincerity of, there are people who are doing this and you will be affected. You're likely to come through this. So rather than be a helpless victim, don't think you're going to die and the problem's going to get solved. You will come through this. At least have food and water, would you? Do that for us, would you? I have how you go to Costco and you buy those giant things of toilet paper? I put that on the floor and I put 19 gallons of water, and it's the same size as those toilet paper rolls. So my point is to people, if you can store toilet paper, you can store enough water, So it's making it reasonable for people to do is really important.
Great, thank you.
Great points. So we'll close out with just a couple more questions related to kind of communication and technology. So one of these is that questioner says, it sounds like the Seattle hubs are planning to use all forms of communication available, amateur radio, GMRS, FRS, and SneakerNet, as you mentioned that. So how do you train for that? That's such a big spectrum, if you'll forgive the pun, of different kinds of communications.
So we train the SneakerNet people, that's just, like we've done bike exercises actually, where we use cargo bikes to move stuff around. For GRMS, we have Monday night nets. And we do, just like little workshops, we have little clinics where we get enough new people and it's time to, teach them how to, we pre-program the radio so that it's like really just turned between one of these 4 stations. But, it's really more than that. And so we do, some coaching, onboarding of new hub captains. And then I got to put a plug in for the ACS team. You guys help us with common training, the messaging, the radio messaging of protocols. We've done joint workshops on that, but you have to do it because you always have new people coming in. And in the 2 years between somebody plugged in and plugged out, they've forgotten it all. So you always have to do it.
That's right. Thank you.
All right. Go ahead, Catherine.
Oh, no, I thought that was the end.
Great. Well, there was one other question also related to communications modes there, because there was some discussion in the chat about the welfare forms that are present in WinLink among the many forms that are available there. So the person could you just mention again the issue with the Safe and Well program or the lack thereof?
The Safe and Well program, actually, the Red Cross does not have a website anymore. I don't know if it was accidentally or whatever, but it lapsed. So they could not stand up a Safe and Well website today unless they got a special deal with Australia, who does still have one. So that's the first aha moment we had. And it really is the power. Their form has an intake. And think of it this way. Somebody else has already talked about HIPAA. If you put public information out, you have to be aware you're putting public information out, and that person has to give that information. So digital is much better, but you still have to collect enough information so that the Louise Barker in Kansas City knows Cindy Barker is the right Cindy Barker. You have to have some way to connect the dots there. So it's thinking through that and making sure we don't have to collect a ton of information, which was what the Safe and Well website does. It would, when it's active, it makes you fill out a bunch of stuff. And we're like, we are not going to have time to collect a bunch of stuff, and we're not going to be able to transmit a lot of stuff if we're having to do voice at all. So we are working with ARL on how to do that with the existing or modified forms.
Great. Well, that's going to close it out for this segment. Cindy, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And for being part of Com Academy 22.